Hello, my name is Reena Ranger. I'm Chair of Women Empowered. Welcome to our first iGlobal Live in Conversation series. We're delighted to have with us today Marina Wheeler, a barrister who was appointed to the Queen's Counsel in 2016. She is an author and a columnist, and her book, The Lost Homestead, tells the story of her Indian Sikh mother, Deep Singh, and her family's experience in the Partition of 1947. Marina's mother is an extraordinary woman who's had a full life, and we followed Deep when she marries Marina's English father, a journalist and the BBC's longest serving foreign correspondent, Sir Charles Wheeler, throughout their life and their journey to their home in Sussex. The Lost Homestead touches on global themes that strongly resonate today, but above all, it is about coming to terms with the past and about the stories that we choose to tell about ourselves.
Read it in 2 days. I put it down. It's amazing. Thank you very much.
Well, I'm delighted.
I was telling Vidya, I was phoning my grandmother. We lost my grandfather earlier this year, and these are the conversations we never had and probably should have. And I was phoning my grandmother, going, "Do you know this lady? She went to Kinnaird College as well. Do you know this?"
So your grandma went to Kinnaird, did she?
She did.
How interesting.
So the story is that she was at the college and then the trouble started, and my grandfather was a family friend sent to pick her up and bring her to Delhi. And apparently he hired a horse and carriage. He bought her lunch, and the rest is history.
Oh, that's a brilliant story, I have to say, yeah.
The Lost Homestead is an intimate welcome into your family and a whirlwind tour of history. It tells us the story of your mum, Deep, and her family experiences and life pre-partition, during, and post. The book contains so many familiar names, places, and stories that I think resonate with Punjabis of our generation, because I guess we punctuate the silences of our family histories through the words of others. And you note another shared experience that nobody really ever talks about: partition. Govinda Chadda's film started this conversation for you and your mother, and your Papaji's advice was to never speak of what they had lost. But with now so many unable to have that conversation with loved ones due to them passing, do you think that books like yours should form part of a renewed national curriculum, so when we learn about British history, we learn the lessons and histories and experiences of all those countries that shaped it?
I do. Thank you, Reema. I think you touch on something absolutely critical, which is the silence that has surrounded partition for so many of those affected. And I think there's probably a sort of personal and a political answer to that. You mentioned my grandfather, Papaji. And yes, his edict was to my mum and her siblings after they left what's now Pakistan: we won't speak about anything that we've lost. And he did stick to that. And I think thinking about that and talking about that with my mother, I think that was just the only way that he felt able to cope and survive the tremendous upheaval that he had experienced. And I suppose for him, it was the most acute. He was head of the family. They had lost, it wasn't just material things. It wasn't just a home that my mum had called paradise, but he lost the status that he had. He lost a garden filled with fruit trees and flowers. And so everything that I suppose he loved and had made him, feel whole. I say that, parentheses, he hadn't lost his family. And of course, that made our family so much, luckier than so many other people. But I think for him, yes, that not speaking about it was essential to be able to survive. And I guess as the generations go by, it's easier. We have some distance. We don't feel the immediate pain in the same way. So I think even for my mother, in talking to me, that the fact is she had suppressed so much, so there was only a certain amount that she could actually remember. But I absolutely think that we do need to start discussing, particularly with this global diaspora in Britain, we need to start having a mature conversation about empire, Britain in India, I think now is a perfect time to be tackling difficult subjects because, we're leaving the EU. This is the return of global Britain. I think we need to work out what that means. And part of that, I think, needs to be, yes, looking at all of our history in the round.
So you're talking about some of the parallels about today. And I think throughout that book, you do feel those parallels with today's political climate, conversations about identity, what may have seemed implausible a long time ago became a reality a few years later. And then there are also parallels with your life and your mother's life. You're forging your own paths, you through a rather tumultuous phase in your life. Did you expect to see those parallels from the beginning, or was it something that surprised you as you were writing it?
I didn't expect it at all. And I think in my prologue, I sketch a little bit of my, I don't know, slightly blasé attitude to writing the book at the beginning. I mean, I think I could see that my mother had an incredibly interesting story. I mean, it was the 70th anniversary of independence and of partition. And there were a lot of programs on television here commemorating to that. And she would say, my God, I'd forgotten I was there. So this was, for example, 1946 in Calcutta. And so it was clear to me, that her story needed to be told. But I suppose I was still in the kind of mind frame of, oh my God, do I have time for this? There was a lot going on. So I didn't expect it. As you say, all sorts of things happened in my own life that meant I actually then had slightly more time, and I took a sabbatical from work. So I was able to reflect a bit more. And yes, it was a real journey, I think, of discovery for me in a good way.
You talk about you needing to take time to do it. It is such an emotive issue. And I remember reading in your book, you said that before you embarked on it, you were quite wary because you were going to have to touch upon great political stories, great political figures, historical events. And there is no kind of general consensus about what happened. Or what do you think has shocked you, or what has surprised you? Because you've written this through your family story, so it's very personal. And what has been the surprise elements of that? And how has this book been received in India?
Good questions. I think that, yes, I was wary because, as you say, it's such a sensitive topic. Partition was such a calamity on the occasion of Indian independence. And so while, Britain for many years framed it as, a peaceful transfer of power, it was that. And there is a lot to, I suppose, to applaud in that, if one compares it to, say, other countries that moved from, colonialism to democracy. But it also was the occasion, as we're discussing, of absolute carnage and, 10 million people displaced, etc. So yes, and of course, we now have two successor states, India and Pakistan, who view this event as nations very, very differently. You don't talk generally about the partition in Pakistan, certainly not in sort of official circles. It is the creation of a Muslim homeland. And then here too, of course, empire's not much discussed. It's avoided because it's such a difficult subject. It's not really on the curriculum, as we've said. So, but I think what surprised me in a way was how I have been met by people really interested in the subject matter. I've not so far been met by outrage or anger. Maybe that's a little harder on Zoom, but I just think in India too, I think so far it's been well received. And what I've been really surprised about, because I suppose I wrote the book predominantly for a British readership, because I didn't really know. I wondered, if I'm talking about this history, is this history that is so well understood in India? But my surprise is that I think it's not. And so many of my Indian relatives, you know, educated people of different generations have said there's so much that we've learned. We don't learn this in school. So what I think has happened, all, you know, in each country, is that we have a lot of the emotion from these events, but the facts have got lost. So what I'm pleasantly surprised about is an appetite, I think, to understand, you know, actually what happened. And I think that's very valuable.
I think books like yours, as I said, do punctuate the silences in other families and start that conversation for people, which are very difficult. Before I talk about your mum, I just wanted to ask you that we learn about your family and the Mirza family, and you've had a very long-standing generational relationship with them. You were once neighbors, and then you found yourselves separated by a border. I think in 2007, you had a family wedding and the Mirzas all came and joined in the celebration. But in your book, you say recently at another family wedding, unfortunately, they weren't able to join you because they couldn't get visas. And I was just wondering, you know, how do you feel? Or isn't it just really sad that even today, the close relationship between your family and the Mirzas is impacted by distrust that exists on both sides of the India-Pakistan border?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, this is a family that the two young boys went to school with one of my relatives' fathers. And come partition, we helped, my family helped them to get to Lahore, where they wanted to go from Delhi to Lahore. And yes, for many years, they were incredibly close and came in large numbers to some of our family weddings, but recently haven't been able to. And that is a source of huge sadness. And I was certainly struck when I went to Pakistan, to Lahore and to Sargodha, where my mother came from, at the almost mirror image of suffering and loss that is felt on that side, I think, as much as on the Indian side. And the Mirza family were one such family, but there were plenty of others who spoke to me of what they had lost. And it's a sad thing that politicians, I think, maybe don't appreciate or don't feel it's in their interests for political reasons always to take heed of ordinary people's yearning for people-to-people contacts. And I think that we're obviously in that sort of a situation at the moment.
You can see that the impact and the legacy of what happened so many years ago is still very prevalent today for so many people. Let's talk about your mum. Deep, we get to know through you as, I feel, an incredibly brave and wise woman. And she was a lifelong learner in so many senses of the word. When she was reading your drafts, it almost feels like she was relearning about herself and her experiences through your words and observations. Did she enjoy the whole experience?
Well, I'm mulling over this word, enjoy. She was certainly enriched by the experience. And I think, as I sketch in the book, she was, and we've talked about silence. So I think she dealt with trauma by suppressing it. That definitely was the way that she found herself able to cope. So I suppose the two really difficult episodes of her life, Partition, and then she had an unhappy first marriage. And I think both of those were things that she never wanted to talk about. She was willing to talk to me about Partition. She saw that it was an important topic. And so she did. And then I suppose her marriage came into that sort of tangentially. But I certainly think that there was quite a lot that, you know, we touched on, but I took the view that they were topics that were difficult for her, and she made it clear how far she could comfortably go. And I took the view that I wasn't going to press that. that I wasn't setting out to write this book to create a blockbuster full of, to put pressure on her. So I didn't. And I hope that I was respectful enough and let her decide how much she was willing to share. But I think the positive side was that some things were uncomfortable. Yes, some things she felt a sort of yearning for. So I think when she described Delhi in the late 50s, after she had left her unhappy marriage and worked at the Canadian Embassy as social secretary, that kind of life and time that she described, where there was a euphoria of being a new independent country, it was outward looking. She met interesting people from all around the globe, including my father, who was then posted as a BBC correspondent there in Delhi. So she spoke about that with great yearning and some nostalgia. And then I think what was really interesting was her also, through our conversations, remembering some of her achievements that I think she'd almost forgotten, because, I mean, I'm sure you know what it's like with older people. They become, or she had become, quite preoccupied by the difficulty of everyday life, new physical ailments that would appear, and we'd have conversations about, her leg being painful. But then when I was with her and we were talking about the past, she'd say, yes, gosh, actually, maybe it wasn't bad. Those degrees that I got, she got a degree in Russian and a degree in psychology. And then she remembered working at Amnesty International for years. And so I feel that was a very, as I say, enriching thing for her to be able to reflect over at what, in fact, turned out to be really the last period of her life.
I wonder, because when you take a step back, she's led an extraordinary life. She's done so many things. She's seen so much. She's experienced so much. And I wonder if it just sometimes it gets lost because, like you say, you get preoccupied with everyday life, making sure your croissant is there for breakfast and all.
Yeah.
She started life in British India. Do you feel that her journey came full circle through all those different parts of the world and experiences? Because the home that which she loved was in Sussex. It reads as a sanctuary and an idyllic kind of place of peace. Do you think that her whole life came full circle?
I think there was, yes, an element of that. But I think what the Sussex home was, and what was so important about it, and why, in a way, yes, it was a circle, I think was more that it's a beautiful garden surrounded by, it's filled with fruit trees and flowers like her original home in Sargodha was. So I certainly think that she felt there was a sort of symmetry there. But I'm not sure whether the Britishness part of it was necessarily a feature. I think it was more that it was home, and in Sargodha it had felt it was a family home. And I suppose what's home really, I think a place that you feel safe. I mean, obviously Sargodha in the end, it wasn't safe and they were forcibly had to leave. But until that time, it was a sanctuary. And I think, yes, Sussex became that for her as well.
And her family home. Yeah. You went looking for your ancestral home. In the end, it almost feels like you found something else, which was yourself. You say in the book that when people have asked you, where are you from, you always used to hesitate because you never knew the answer. Could you answer that with a little more ease now? Or just a very, very long story.
Yeah, I think I can. I think that may have something to do with age and confidence as well. And I think one thing I've understood through this journey is that although people always want a simple answer, but there isn't always a simple answer. So I suppose I feel more confident about, not trying to grasp that, that stock answer, and just say, I'm from all over. And I suppose being more comfortable with multiple identities, I've had a while to think about that. And also talking to some of my other nieces and Indian origin nieces and nephews who live in different places around the globe. And I talk about this a bit in the book. I think understanding for them as well, you know, and they may have married people from yet another region of the world. And yes, I think that is a hugely important thing in this age for us to be able to say and be, I am comfortable with a multiple identity.
I think we're also learning that many of these questions, like you talk about these people, there are not simple, benign answers. There's so much richness behind everything, and we should celebrate that.
Yeah.
Your children are very fondly woven throughout the book, and it seems that they were a very large part of your journey of discovery. So your trips to India and Pakistan allowed you to have that self-discovery. What do you think that they will take of their experience, and what do you think that what would you like them to carry with them about their global Indian heritage and their Sikh family?
Well, I think as a family, we've always been close. And before this, we would travel to India, and usually we would attend relatives' weddings. Not only was that, as you'll know, fantastic party time, but also a chance to see all of, you know, relatives collected in one place. But yes, writing this book has undoubtedly brought our family closer together. It's brought so many family members, you know, delving into cupboards and boxes, looking for photos, sharing stories, thinking about some of the relatives, you know, the older generation who we've lost. So I'm very happy that for my kids, who, as you say, were with me for a lot of this, I think that cemented many of those relationships through all the generations, and that will stay with them. I think my kids have, I would say, a fairly global outlook. One has studied Arabic at university, one studied Mandarin. But I have to say, up to now, none of us have yet mastered an Indian language. So I think that Hindi or Punjabi should definitely be on the list of one of us has got to make a proper effort and become at least able to converse reasonably well in those languages.
And that's lovely. I think also that kind of curiosity comes with age, as you've found going back to who you are, where you come from, what makes you what you are. I know the book is about your mum and the focus rightfully should be on her, but your father, Sir Charles Wheeler, the longest serving BBC foreign correspondent, was he an inspiration or a guiding force when you were writing and researching this book? Did you feel his presence or his influence? And did you almost feel like you're Marina, the correspondent, writing possibly one of the most important stories that she could?
Well, that's, Reena, a very perceptive question, because yes, I did feel his presence and influence. And I start the book in the prologue in his study in Sussex, looking at his awards from journalism on the wall and thinking about, and it's a study that we've hardly touched since he died in 2008. And there's a whole bookshelf of books about India. And, you know, I look through those, and some of them are his. And one book in particular that I start my book off with is Nehru's Discovery of India. And when I took that off the shelf and opened it, I saw it was his book from 1958 when he was a correspondent there. But then a little card falls out that was my mother's. So, I mean, I was quite moved by this book because obviously Nehru, the discovery of India, I mean, it's an incredibly important book, both Nehru himself learning about this country that he had spent a lot of time away. But I think now also, I think, you know, a hugely important topic is Nehru's beliefs about democracy and the rule of law safe in India today. So that moment was very important. And it was a moment that I felt with that book was sort of both parents speaking to me And then I think it was then that I decided that I did want my father to be present in this book as a journalist too. So I went during the researching to the BBC Written Archive and found some of his longer pieces from India and Pakistan during this era. Well, and indeed from Berlin and Washington. And reading his prose, his stories, I did feel that's what I want to do. And what I think was one of his hallmarks was to take quite a complicated subject and distill it into simple, readable language. And I hope that I've done that in the book. Well, you're nodding, so I'm going to take that as you think that maybe...
Just say it's fantastic. And you almost feel that you're a part of your family. You feel like you've been enveloped in this kind of hug, and you're going through this whole journey with you and your entire clan. So I think you did it very well.
Well, I'm delighted to hear that.
Do you think that not only have you discovered a bit about yourself, but is Marina the writer born? Do you think this will be the first of many books?
Well, I hope so. I mean, I certainly did enjoy writing it. I enjoyed the research. I hope that comes through. I enjoyed traveling. I enjoyed talking to people, well, my family, who I obviously knew, but about things that we had never necessarily spoken about before. And I enjoyed meeting new people. And I enjoyed going to Pakistan for the first time. I think I was very lucky to be able to do that. And I think maybe, having that perspective of, British Indian and with the ability to travel to Pakistan was fantastically eye-opening. So yes, I think actually I would like to write another book. The topic I'll have to mull over, but I hope it will be the first of more.
Well, for me, before we let you go, the things that I've really observed is that history is so nuanced. The people who you may have had labeled as very simple heroes and villains, there's so much more to circumstance, context, and you almost want to read more and more about each of the characters involved. I also was just amazed that the amount of research you had to do, the amount of times you were in libraries here, India, Pakistan, speaking to people. And it almost got me thinking that if this had happened in kind of today's world of social media, of internet, of where we're losing that ability to write letters and treasure them, what does a book like this that has to go reflect on a historical event look like in an age where there are so many articles online and you don't have those maybe funneled texts to refer to? I don't know.
Well, you raised some really interesting points. I mean, the point that you make about looking for villains is something I feel very strongly, and I hope, well, you say that you found that interesting, and just to pick one, Jinnah, I grew up with my mother saying Jinnah was an evil genius, and of course she, with millions of others, held him responsible for the division of the country and for ultimately the loss of their home. But he was in fact a complex historical figure, and his whole political journey, from being originally a passionate advocate for Hindu-Muslim unity, and a very effective, charismatic campaigner against colonial rule, all of that's forgotten, because he became ultimately an advocate for separatism and for the creation of Pakistan. But there is so much nuance around. There's questions of, was the Pakistan that was created what he actually wanted? I mean, this is a thesis of Aish Jael. He's just one of those characters that I've looked at. But absolutely, I mean, I felt that it is so important for us nowadays to resist this temptation to just see the world in black and white and see people as good or bad. Usually there's some complicated alchemy of all of those things present.
You learn that the world is various shades of grey. Before I let you go, I read that your mother was painted by M.F. Hussain.
Yes.
And But the picture's not in the book.
The picture's not in the book. I've seen the picture, but I don't own the picture. So the picture is, in fact, there is a picture of the owner of the painting looking at the picture. So it's, which was a photograph that my mum had kept for all of these years. So as things stand now, that's as good as we could do.
Thank you very much. It was a absolutely delight to read, and I really did enjoy it. And I hope it is the first of many.
Thank you very much, Reena.
Thank you.